The counselors, the camp instructor/director making sure all us boys took off all our clothes and watched us shower. Very creepy. The Phantom Pooper, church camp early 2000s. Someone was pooping in suitcases. Everyone was worried they would be targeted, but no one knew who it was. A camp counselor and others were hit. They even got away with pooping in a large gathering area with many people around. I don't think they were caught. Church camp made us burn our panties that were shameful to God, yet kids were doing all kinds of sexual stuff in the woods. Talking to my friend who says she has to review counselor resumes. I joke, need to screen out the pedophiles. Her, deadpan conversational matter of fact, no, you look for pedophiles in the support staff, the cooks and janitors and stuff. Bears. As a 13-year-old kid, I went out into the woods at like 1 a.m. with a headlamp to pee, just immediately behind my cabin, because I didn't want to walk to the wash house. While I'm peeing, I look forward and see a large bear, just staring at me. Would have pissed myself if not for the fact that I was already peeing. Either way, I just finished my stream while he stared at me, and walked backwards back to the cabin. He turned around and walked away, but there was no chance in hell that I would turn my back on a bear and run the other way. Ghosts. During the summers, the first would spend a month or so visiting family in Michigan. Some of my cousins my age would go to a camp in the up called Hiawatha. The cabins we got assigned for the week had about 6 campers and 2 counselors and were spaced far apart from each other deep in the woods away from in common area. There were stories about a father and son that were hunting near the campgrounds during the off-season. The story went that the father thought he saw a big buck and took a shot at it only to get to the deer and find out he shot his son in the neck. Being so deep in the woods and such a fatal shot, he shot his son in the head to stop the pain. The game and wildlife agents that found them said the father suffered an apparent gunshot wound through the roof of his mouth or of his head in what looked like a murder/suicide. The counselors always felt it necessary to tell this story to the younger/new campers. Now, I don't know if hearing the story and the atmosphere of cabins being so far from the common areas and deep in the woods caused me to see things. But a friend I was walking from the cabins to the mess hall with early one morning, before the breakfast bell, we saw what looked like a father and son dressed like they were hunting carrying shotguns walking towards our cabin. Ours was almost second from being the farthest from anything. We took off so fast sprinting through the trees, and once we hit the open field between the cabins and the mess hall, we saw another group of guys running out behind us. We were shocked to see anyone else before the bell rang, and running no less. We asked why they were running too. They looked back from the direction they came, turned back to us and said, "We saw a hunter pointing a shotgun at us." Serial rapists. I went to a popular Christian faith-based sports camp for several summers as a kid. When I was 12, one of my cabin counselors turned out to be the most popular/beloved leader at camp. He was inclusive, energetic, fun. He gave just as much attention to the cool/popular kids as he did to the outcasts. Randomly, he went to the same university as my older brother and my best friend's older sister, so that created a connection with our families. He also happened to be romantically involved at the time with an up-and-coming singer who lived in our hometown. For a couple years after we first got to know him at camp, he would visit my family and my friend's family for a long weekend. By this time, I was over camp. I never enjoyed playing sports, and that's the only thing the camp had to offer. He would give me and my friend a hard time about bailing on camp and not writing him with any reliable frequency. By the time I finished JR High, that relationship had fallen by the wayside. Anyway, about 10 years ago this guy was arrested and convicted for being a serial child abuser. His MO, make the victims feel special and get close to their family. So far almost 60 victims have come forward. One sadly committed suicide in 2019. The camp leadership knew pretty much the entire time what was going on and did everything they could to keep the authorities out of it. Apparently he tried, but I was lucky enough to never be one of his victims. He's currently serving 2 life sentences plus 30 years in prison. Caves in the lake. Every year I've went to the same camp, and every year they tell us 3 things. Watch out for banana spiders, don't have sex, don't attempt to dive down the lake. The lake in question has many caves at the bottom of it, probably 50 feet to 100 foot down. They used to teach scuba diving but haven't since a counselor drowned. Nobody has scuba dived in that lake or attempted to reach the bottom for 15 years. The stories are passed on from counselor to counselor, and all is relatively the same. A group of kids didn't see their counselor, searched for him, came back up when oxygen got low and alerted another counselor. Counselors went in the water to look for him and people checked every inch of this camp in the middle of the woods. People were praying he wasn't in the water and somehow got out. 3 hours later his body was found and taken from the water. He was 22 years old and gone just like that. Negligence plus bears, hike up the mountain, which I was already dreading because of my asthma. And when we got up there, instead of tents we slept in a tarp that had been set up to cover the ground, up and then over us. Meaning our feet were pointing out into the forest. I woke up halfway, thought the night to snuffling sounds and heavy footsteps. Then something bumped my feet, which were sticking out a little farther than the rest of the group. I froze up and waited for what I'm almost 100% convinced was a bear lose interest and move on. Test the water by jumping in. I was on a canoeing trip. It was a trip that had been done by this camp for 10 to 20 years. Same canoeing portion of a pretty well-known river. Every year on the first day of the canoe trip, kids and staff members would jump off this rock on the edge of the river. It was probably 20 feet up in the air, estimating, but the water was deep. Probably 10 to 12 feet of water. This group of kids asked to make the jump, just as thousands of kids had done before. We tested the jump by having the tallest staff member jump off the cliff. He safely did so, just as always. So then the kids went and did the same. Several kids jumped, came up and were all fine. Then one kid jumps, comes up and says, "I think I cut my knee." Everyone laughed, but then this kid said, "No, seriously, come look." There was a giant chunk of the fat around his knee missing. If the injury had been elsewhere, it would be pumping blood out. It could have been much worse, but the kid was fine. He went to the hospital and got 12 or so stitches. He didn't rejoin the trip. But he went back and stayed the 2 weeks at camp. Needless to say, no kid ever jumped off that giant rock again. From our camp, attempted murder. I went to Girls Scout camp when I was around 8 years old, so around 2001. All the counselors were young 20-year-olds. There was a girl in my group who did something to piss off the counselors. I don't remember what, but I know it was minor. It was the middle of summer and super hot, and she was moderately overweight. They made her sit in the sun and wouldn't allow her to have any water as punishment. They were terrible people, made me super afraid of them as a kid. Peacock screams. Went to a camp that was half a mile away from a peacock farm, and I gotta say, peacock screams echoing through the middle of the night are fucking terrifying when you're 10 and nobody told you there was a peacock farm nearby.